before I let you go, there's a couple of questions, Chris, that I want to cover off. And the first one, I guess, is about the climate crisis industrial complex, which you've written about. And I think I'd be interested to hear if you think I've got the right take on this. So we've talked a bit about the language of emergency being employed. We see climate crisis, global boiling, all of those things. And I've always been quite skeptical when I see these things because those who are claiming to be saving the planet or making an impact and claiming that it's apolitical and for the greater good and that they're following the science, I tend to see that all of that language that's being used doesn't really stack up. So, for example, the science can't tell you what to do. It can only tell you how things are. And it's political when you decide what to do. So that nothing can possibly be apolitical in that respect. I think there's also this claim to love humanity and doing things for the greater good. But when you actually speak to some people about the common man, you will find that their love for humanity quickly diminishes when you put an actual individual or a normal person in front of them with normal needs like everyone else. And and then I see it in the corporate world where I see lots of firms being encouraged to do something about it, to change strategy, to move towards the energy transition. And they call upon this vast array of sources that have headlines that are in line with that emergency language. And I've realized that people only seem to care about propriety rather than truth, which is many-sided. So what I mean by that is they try and stay on point because they believe it's going to help bring about this transformational change. It's going to be the good of everyone, and totally overlook all of the nuances that sit behind it that suggest that actually the action we may choose to take isn't as clear-cut as we're being told it is. So is that the right understanding of the climate crisis industrial complex that you're talking about? Is there anything else to it?
I think that pretty much sums it up pretty well and a lot nicer than the way I say things. But yeah, I think it's pretty on point. I mean, and I think I really like that you pointed out about this is that a lot of these people they think that what they want to do is for the better of humanity, and they care about our well-being. But when you look at them, they have so much vitriol towards the human race. Like they want us to go extinct, that we're a disease. And one of my favorite questions I always ask these people is if you think that, and nobody ever answers this because this is where I really box them, is I ask them, okay, if you think that human civilization is a disease and it's destroying the planet, then why are you trying to save civilization from collapse? And they never want to answer that. The reality is that these people are a lot of these green activists. I think some of them, there are some out there that are true believers that do want better for humanity, and they have this philosophy that they think that what they're doing is right. I don't doubt that. I actually know a few people who do think along those lines, and I can respect them for their passion, but they're not looking at it the right way. But a lot of these people, if you just do a quick glance at their social media pages, or heck, you just have a look at their Twitter bio, they'll say that they're degrowthers, they're degrowth communists, and they want to dismantle our socioeconomic system in the West, here, over in Europe and here in the United States, Canada. They want is they're narcissists. They want their own little clean habitat, as George Carlin said, their own little clean habitat to live. They only care about themselves. They don't care about anybody else. They just want their own little. They have their own desires and outcomes from this, and I think that's why a lot of these people, back to the nuclear thing, I think a lot of these people oppose nuclear because, aside from the people that are scared of they think nuclear weaponry, or they think of Chernobyl or accidents that we've had with nuclear plants. A lot of the reason people oppose nuclear, especially on the politician side of this, is that, and the people in the bureaucracy, people that work for the United Nations or in Parliament or in government here in the United States, I think that a lot of these people don't actually want solutions. They like their careers. Okay, their careers depend on there being a climate problem, an issue to solve. If there's no issue, then there's no need for these people to have a job. So they actually like the fact that there's opposition from fossil fuel companies or skeptics because it keeps everybody in business, and they don't want this to end. And it also, if the government were to deploy a renewable energy grid, well, I guess nuclear is renewable, but solar and wind grid, again, it's very weather dependent. Wind's not very useful when energy demand is highest, when it's really hot or really cold for heating and cooling, because you get underneath these air masses, these high pressure systems, you get cold core highs during Arctic outbreaks. You get these like surface high pressure systems with troughs aloft. It's Arctic, like the polar vortex, these big Arctic outbreaks. The wind's not blowing because it's a giant air mass. It's very cold. Same thing with heat waves. You get this kind of ridge, this dome of high pressure, and this big warm core high. Again, the wind's not blowing. So when energy demand is highest, wind's not going to be effective. And then during snowstorms or ice storms, solar panels get covered. So you're going to have even more storage capacity for this. This calculations I showed earlier about the amount of land area, that just doesn't even take into account the storage that you'd have to add to that. Those are just if you assume that they're working based on those power capacities. But anyway, nuclear, the people oppose that because if you have an energy grid that's based on intermittent weather dependent solar and wind technologies, you weaken the grid by allowing the federal government to have control over energy. They regulate it, they ration it, they give you a monthly allowance on how much energy you're allowed to use because there's only so much energy that you can generate with wind and solar. And that allows the government to control everything. If you control energy, you control everything. You control everybody. You control everybody's actions. And that's a big goal of these people in the climate movement. Is they want to control people and their habits. They have this very anti-humanist, anti-capitalist approach to this issue, as you mentioned. And people always say that nuclear, as I mentioned earlier, is expensive to build, but that's not the case in Japan. It's not the case in France. It's not the case in India. India builds nuclear power for lower cost per terawatt hour than they do for the solar. And France powers 70% of their grid on nuclear power, and they pay less energy per terawatt hour than the European average, the EU27 average. So, but when it comes to the climate industrial complex, these individuals, it's very much about keeping the public alarmed because it's a self-enforcing kind of feedback loop. Hundreds of thousands of people, their livelihoods depend on there being a problem. So a crisis doesn't have to exist. The public has to have a perception that a crisis exists. It's become a lucrative multi-trillion-dollar industry. And it's a self-enforcing, reinforcing feedback loop. The federal government can regulate energy in the name of reducing carbon dioxide emissions to save the planet. And they do this by keeping the public alarmed over the weather, over very trivial things. But people are gullible. They buy into it. And they use taxpayer funds, at least here in the United States, to fund research grants through the National Science Foundation. And those are given out to any academic standing in line with their hand held out to solve the problem. And the scientist then comes under pressure because of the grant, the purpose of the grant, to kind of produce research that shows that, okay, this is a problem and we need to address it. And they can get statistical curves and produce results that show these accelerations of these trends by manipulating statistics and using some statistical analyses and tricks to get desired results. You can't kind of fabricate numbers in research because that does look really bad if you just make up stuff. There was actually some ocean acidification studies that were retracted a couple of years ago because some numbers were made up. So even if you are on the alarmist side of this, you can't make numbers up because it looks bad, but you can play around with statistics and stuff to get a kind of a desired result. Kind of like Stephen McIntyre was talking about the hockey stick graph. You can get a hockey stick curve by just using various statistical tricks and stuff. That's above my pay grade, though. He's a mathematician. I'm not, but he was explaining that to me on Twitter Spaces one time. But all that is required to ensure that people are alarmed is the average person thinks that there's a huge climate problem. Because if they think that, then he or she will have no problem giving their tax dollars to fund climate research to solve the problem. They come up with solutions. And to ensure that it continues, that climate research these days mostly focuses on addressing impacts and how negative these impacts are going to be and how it's going to affect your daily activities. How is it going to affect your favorite hobbies like skiing? Or how is it going to affect ice skating? Or how is it going to affect the maple industry, maple syrup? How is it going to affect, you know, you're surfing at the beach or some weird thing? Climate change in wine growing or baseball, or how is it going to negatively impact these things? Because if you can get somebody concerned, well, global warming is going to ruin, you know, my Nationals or Atlanta Braves game, then I want this problem to be solved. I want to help scientists solve this problem. I want to be able to watch my Orioles play. And so they do this by keeping global people just alarmed about stuff. And if you can, and it gets them to vote for power hungry politicians to advance their agenda, which is usually authoritarian in nature. And it gives their constituents a false promise that they're going to be saving the planet and bettering humanity, when in fact there's going to be no measurable difference in the quality of life. And actually, there probably will be a negative impact as we choose the net zero route. It's a guise, and it's a good one because it's been with us for 30 plus years. And this feedback loop, it keeps the government kind of in control of things, and it also bankrolls academics and keeps people in academia and keeps people in the bureaucracy. It keeps them employed with jobs.